Hey everyone, today my guest is Benjamin Shapiro. He has many successful podcasts going on. One of them is Voices of Search, the other one is Martech, and this is the third one. It's just launched. Can you remind me the name?
The third show is the Revenue Generator podcast. It was actually launched 2 days ago. It's our
Yeah,
baby.
many congrats. I mean, I'm sure it's a hard work and it's not easy to have all those three things in your lap and just concentrate on different aspects of marketing. So how did you find your way with these three different podcasts?
Yeah, the first one's always the hardest. And what ended up happening was I was a marketing consultant and I created the first podcast, the Martech podcast, because I needed to go find new prospects, meet new leads. And so the intent was to invite guests that I thought might be good candidates to be my clients as a consultant. And then, maybe I would grow an audience and maybe some of them would buy consulting services as well. But in the process of doing that, the audience grew faster than I ever would have expected.
Wow.
So I guess I was the right person at the right place at the right time. And I decided to start selling sponsorships. And the first month after we had spent 11 months building the Martech podcast, we hit 10,000 downloads, and then we started selling sponsorships and we sold $25,000 of inventory in the first month. And I said, okay, I'm done with consulting. I'm going to be a talking head and just be a podcast host. So I converted my Anchor consulting client to be a podcast production sponsor. And that's where the second show came out, the Voices of Search. But I had already built a template and a model and some process. And so we've been working on those two shows for a little over 4 years, and they drive over 100,000 downloads a month. I think we hit like 1.2 million downloads last year.
It's not easy.
And then last year, sorry to cut you off. The story goes, I wanted to continue to build more content, but the problem that we were having was my bandwidth. That for me to be the host of more shows, I just couldn't do it. And so we started building out automation for content production, what we're now calling our content as a service. And so with the third podcast we're launching, I don't actually have to be the host. We have the CMO of Lean Data, Doug Bell, is the host of the Revenue Generator podcast, but we're using the same infrastructure that we've built to automate the podcast production process, how we create our social feeds, how we build our newsletters, our websites, and then also how we aggregate data from all of those properties to help Lean Data do demand gen based on the podcast. And so we've built this sort of rich infrastructure where when we start adding new podcasts to our network, I don't have to do the manual work of editing and publishing and all that stuff, but also we're able to have other hosts join us in our fun.
Yeah, well, that's a smart way. And it's not easy to picture and envision all of those things, at the same time. But it's like you're a media production company right now. And it feels like it would go on like that.
We're headed that direction. I think we're actually rebranding my company. It was called Ben J. Shap LLC, which feels very like me centric,
but it's a consultant.
Well, it was, right?
Yeah.
I was the product when we first launched this company, but now that it's changed, we're changing it to be called I Hear Everything. And so I Hear Everything has 3 lines of business. There's our content as a service where we help brands build their voice and create new media properties. There is our podcast network, which is selling advertising in the shows that we own and produce. And then we have a creator cultivation platform that we're working on, figuring out ways to get talented people that have reach and something to say and building them into our existing properties and hopefully helping them create their own shows. So we're working on kind of being more of a full service new media production business.
Yeah, and a couple of months ago, I remember that you are also included in the Hutspot's
podcast network.
Yeah, network. So that was another good call and good step for you to move forward.
It was the best case scenario when you start doing cold outreach. We had an outreach campaign, and honestly, almost mistakenly, we emailed the CMO of HubSpot. And it was
Really?
part of our ongoing outreach where
Yeah.
if I were paying close enough attention, I probably would have taken him out of the list, but I was busy that week and I just said, whatever the list is, just send it. I don't care.
Yeah.
And on it was the CMO of HubSpot. And we reached out and said, hey, we're the creators of the Martech podcast and we get 60 to 90,000 downloads a month and we're looking for sponsors and we think HubSpot would be a great fit. And he responded back and said, we're building a HubSpot podcast network and we think your show would be a great fit for us. Let me connect you to our head of business development. And the next thing you know, we were members of the podcast network. So sometimes, just putting yourself out there really pays off.
Yeah, I mean, what a great coincidence. And at the same time, what I believe in so many cases, if you are consistent with what you are doing and what you are trying to achieve, and just, be patient, just work hard, do what you need to do every day, and then you will really match with the right opportunity. But it's not it's not a kind of a luck, I'm lucky, that's why it happened.
There's a metaphor. It's a sports metaphor. But basically the idea is that luck is when preparation and timing pay off, or like when you're ready and you're prepared, then you can get lucky.
Yes.
But if you're not doing all the things in the background, and if you're not paying attention, then your ship never comes in. So I kind of subscribe to that as being true. Is we were trying to do all the right things and put ourselves out there and building good products, and when the moment came, we were ready, and that's kind of how we lucked into the HubSpot podcast network.
Yeah, congrats. I mean, in so many levels. I'm always following your podcast, and to be honest, Voices of Search is always my number one to go almost every day, because I know that every day there is something that you bring to the table, and keeping them short, like 20 minutes, sometimes 15 to 20 minutes, but sometimes it's longer than that. It just, gives you bite-sized information which you can really go and dig deeper later, but you get the context and then it's easier to understand and make sense of it.
Yeah.
So thank you for that. Really.
Yeah, I appreciate you being a loyal listener. That was one of the discoveries that we had early on with the Martech podcast. Is we were producing hour-long deep dive interviews and people were listening to 25% of them. So as an experiment, I cut the interview in half and wrote 2 intros and 2 outros, and then people listened to 50% of them. And then we tried that again. We cut them in half again, so they were 15 minutes long. And the next thing you know, people were listening to the entire episode. And so the learning for us was our audience, because the content we produce is relatively dense, marketing tactics and strategies or search engine optimization.
Yes.
It's hard to retain an hour worth of information. So we started putting it out there in smaller chunks and people started gravitating to that. And what we do is when I sit down for an interview, I'll record an hour of content, but we'll break it up into 3 15-minute, episodes. And then we'll probably have 15 minutes of scrap. And then, we get 3 episodes per interview. And so if someone wants to go on a deeper dive, they can listen to all 3 in the series at once and they can get that sort of holistic picture, or they can just, take a little snippet here or there.
Yeah. I totally like this philosophy, and you give the opportunity to the listener to prepare themselves. If there is another episode the next day, then you're really looking forward to listen to that, because it's a continuation and it's another approach that you really get to know about that special topic. So I heard you, kind of, but can you give a little bit more about your journey in marketing? How did you find yourself in marketing?
Yeah. How did I find myself in marketing? My first job at a college before I was a marketer, I'll take it back even farther before that. I went to college and had a business administration with a concentration in marketing degree. So even in my education, I sort of felt like marketing was the right mix of art and science for me. But my first job out of college was a terrible sales job. I was knocking on doors. It was like the beginning of the cell phone era, like getting thrown out of businesses as a solicitor with 90-degree heat, wearing a suit. It was awful. But I learned a lot about, people and persuasion, and sales experience is really important. And then eventually I worked my way from that terrible sales job. I, basically took a job making coffee and copies in a sports marketing agency. And I learned a little bit about account management. And then over time, as my career evolved, I started working at eBay at a relatively entry level job. And that's really where my career in technology and marketing started. But I kind of worked my way up from the bottom of the bottom,
Yeah.
in terms of bad jobs, and kind of found my niche in marketing and technology. And went from eBay to running my own startup to running the marketing department for other startups, became a consultant, and somehow that turned into a podcast business. So that's how I got to where I am today.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm a startup advisor too. So and I founded 3 different startups. But with the startups, life is always so hectic, but at the same time so exciting. What was your experience with the startups?
I would split my experience into sort of 2 camps. Being a startup founder was exhilarating and rewarding and terrible financially. I ran a startup and I lost a lot of money and it didn't go very well, and I was bootstrapped. And so it was like my money and my parents' money. And, I enjoyed it and built something I was proud of, but it never made money. And turns out, working at a startup, you have to be great at all things, not just your area, when you're the founder of a bootstrap startup.
Yes.
So that was a hard lesson to learn. When I was working at the early stage, VC backed startups, it was enjoyable because everything was new and you had all the responsibility of, managing an entire department. But honestly, I struggled a little bit. I found it challenging to be under-resourced,
Yeah.
but with all the pressure of we need results and we need them now. And so for me, it just didn't feel like the perfect fit long term,
Yeah.
because there's all of the pressure downward from the founder and the venture capital community that's on them, pointing
Yeah.
at the head of marketing. So you want growth, you expect things to change very quickly, but in reality, marketing is hard to do effectively and efficiently if you're not willing to be patient. And so, I started moving more into an advisory and a consulting role to help people think about not only what they should be doing from a marketing perspective today, but thinking about how they're going to build their business over the long haul. And that I found to be a little bit more rewarding, but it's a personal decision.
Oh, totally. And the other thing that is, you have you build up a lot of muscles on the way and a lot of experience. So when you see a business or when you think about a business model, you really understand the functions and the necessities. And so it's easier for you to really shape up, the strategy. So it doesn't come very easily unless you have that enormous amount of knowledge and insights and experience.
There's,
And that I know that it's hard lesson because I've been through that too. But at the same time, this is what makes me who I am today.
there's something to be said about being born with the entrepreneurial spirit. Um, I love her to death. She's the most important person in my life. My wife wants to work at a stable company with a stable job and doesn't want to necessarily be responsible for building something up. She's about, helping companies grow and pick their direction once they're scaled. And
Oh
that's a
yeah.
perfectly great career path. And I would go absolutely insane working at a large company because I just can't deal with the logistics and the red tape and the politics. And that's just not who
Yeah.
I am personally, but it's nothing to be said for anybody that's working at a large company. Like, it's really about finding the right match for your personality type. And for me, I've always been a builder and a creator, and, getting to make content and build a business and figure out how to, tape it all together and sort of own it myself is just something I find more rewarding than taking a business from, 100 million to $1 billion. I'd rather go from, hopefully 1 to 1 million.
I'm sure. I mean, and you're very modest about that. So I will see. Next year we will talk, and I will ask you what happened.
If we're at $1 million run rate next year, you won't have to ask, because I'm sure I will be shouting it from the rooftops.
You're really so funny. So, how do you determine the topics for each podcast?
Yeah, it depends on which show. The Martech podcast, we get a lot of inbound requests from PR agents and marketers who want to gain visibility and awareness by being guests on the show. So often what we're doing is sorting through the inbound requests, and then we've built an algorithm that helps us understand when somebody fills out an application to be a guest on the podcast, what's their potential reach. So we're trying to figure out who has not only the ability to create great content, but since we get so many requests for people to come on the show, we have to figure out who can create great content and help us share it with new audiences. And so, for that show, the challenge is not how do we find guests, it's how do we sort through the inbound requests. Voices of Search is a little bit different because we have reoccurring guests.
Yeah, I know.
More often. My buddy Jordan Cooney, Tyson Stockton, all the people that they're recently left Searchmetrics. They're now running a company called Previsible.
Yes.
And for us, it's kind of like, hey, what do you want to talk about today? Let's turn on the microphone and we get to joke around. And we have other invited guests and people that apply to be speakers and other influencers in the community, but it's a little bit of a smaller speaker set. And for the Revenue Generator podcast, we're in the opposite place because the show just started. So we're like actively pushing the show out to try to find guests. And a lot of that is, doing our homework on who is an influencer, and what type of companies people are interested in, and then pushing out a email message to them saying, hey, we think you'd be a great guest. If you're interested in a speaking opportunity, here's the application. And so we're trying to get some demand on the speaking side. So each show has a little bit of a different problem, and in terms of figuring out what we want to say, most of the time that's dictated by who the speaker is and what they feel comfortable, because we want to get really smart, really influential people and let them talk about what they're passionate about. So we're not dictating like, here are the 5 topics we need to cover this month. It's more like, here are the speakers that want to be on the show, and this is what they're interested in discussing.
I see. That's clever, really. Well, recently I'm more on the search engine optimization part of marketing. And that's why I think I love listening your Voices of Search so much, because it just, bite-sized information, and it just gives me a lot of context of what to pursue or what to investigate more. I want to ask you, there is, SEO and sales. There is a kind of an alignment with SEO and sales. How do you identify this alignment, or what is your take?
It's funny you say SEO being aligned with sales. I think of SEO as kind of like a net for marketing, where when there is demand, you can put yourself out there and try to catch the pieces that are falling in your direction. And then it's your website's job to do lead capture and your sales team's job to convert those leads into revenue. I think that there's a broader problem that marketers are facing, and it's not just channel specific with SEO. There's overlap between marketing, between sales, between customer service, between product. That's actually why we're launching the 3rd show, the Revenue Generator, is talking about this new philosophy where marketing departments aren't siloed separately from sales, product, right? Everybody's working on their own things. We're all starting to blend our technology stacks, our services, and our metrics together to basically join forces to have an optimal customer experience. So whether it's SEO, whether it's SEM, there's all of your sort of demand drivers and sort of traffic builders. And then there's your product and your customer service team that's optimizing the experience, feeding your sales team. They all have to be integrated together. And I think that the secret sauce there is using technologies that blend together, and then also using the same KPIs so the team is evaluated and thinking about accomplishing a common goal.
Yeah, exactly. Every department in marketing or in a business entity, they have some sort of relationship with the client and some sort of relationship with the sales, and they don't aware of it. So, for example, if I do not know how my customer is bringing his problem as a phrase, because they will use specific terms which is not familiar to my identification, but they might use it. So I can get this information from the salespeople because they were the ones on the field and they are corresponding with people. So if I don't have this part of it, I could not really deliver converting content on my website.
I'm going through this
Right.
exact problem right now. We're building the iheareverything.com website, and I'm trying to describe the content as a service business, which isn't something that necessarily exists. It's not something people are searching for. So it's really challenging to figure out how to describe, hey, you should use our infrastructure to build a series of products that you may or may not know if you need, but we swear they're going to help your business, right? It's a complicated ask. And so, I agree with you that, in an ideal world, when you're working on a scaled product, you go to the sales team, you say, hey, what are all the ways that customers describe their problem, their pain points? Whether it is talking to your sales team, looking at your customer service queries, seeing what your customers are asking, reaching out to your customers directly, or just doing research with what's, people are searching for, doing your sort of outside of your company's data analysis, you can get really good feedback loops. And the more you're able to sort of interpret what's happening with your customer, understanding the pain that they're going through, and then try to describe the solution in words that they use, the more that's going to resonate with them. And, as I'm building out the new website for my company, I'm going back to some of the people that I've worked with and said, hey, what the heck are you thinking, coming to me out of all people and sponsoring a podcast or having me create a show for you? What, you must be crazy. Why would you do that? And then when they answer, they start defending themselves, and I'm sitting there typing down all the no, what you do is you both build awareness and demand. I'm like, ooh, that's good. Keep going. So, understanding who your customers are and building in those feedback loops, that's really the secret sauce to not only marketing, but also connecting marketing into sales.
Yeah, totally. For one last question, what are your SEO expectations for year 2022?
My SEO expectations for year 2022. Can I tell you a secret?
Go ahead.
I'm the host of the Voices of Search podcast. I'm not an SEO. My job.
Matter.
Look, I know enough to be dangerous. Don't get
Definitely.
me wrong.
You're modest. I understand that.
But I've never had SEO in my title before. I worked on the SEO team once, but I would call myself more of a content marketer and a marketing strategist. So look, last year was all about core web vitals and Google launching, different ways for businesses to understand what's happening with their website. There's always changes that are sort of around the fringes with what the algorithm is doing. I think generally Google is focused on natural language processing and understanding intent and content
Yeah.
at a more granular level. So to me, whether it's, this year, it's kind of a sliding scale. This is just going to continue of Google, not only understanding, well, here's what the domain is generally about, here's what the page is generally about. We're down to the paragraph and the sentence level. And so
Yeah.
it does a couple different things, said the guy who's not actually an SEO. One is, I think that we're going to see more passages being taken or more sort of direct linking to specific parts of your content. And so it's not just going to be Google dropping people off on the top of a web page. It's going to be like, here's the paragraph you care about, or they're going to start pulling more content into Google search results, which means that there's going to be more zero clicks. And two, it brings up the question of how important are links going to be as Google starts to learn more about what the content and the sort of micro content within the page means. That means they need to rely less on the signals to interpret how important you are as a speaker. So look, your authority is always going to matter. Links are not going away. Building domain authority, having expertise, the EATs and the YMYL metrics are always going to, or acronyms are always going to be important. But I think as Google gets a better understanding of language and the natural language processing continues to come along, they're going to focus more on what content answers people's questions. And I think that changes the mix of signals they're using to have people go up in the search results.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree more. I would like to share your websites, your podcasts on the show notes.
Great.
And
thank you.
Is there any other way that people can reach out to you?
So I mentioned we're relaunching or we're rebranding our company to be called I Hear Everything. So you can go to iheareverything.com, and that gives a better understanding of what my company does in terms of content production. The individual shows, Martech podcast, Voices of Search podcast, Revenue Generator podcast, they all have their own domain. So martechpod.com, voicesofsearch.com, and revgenpod.com. And if you want more information about me personally, my consulting website is benjshap.com.
All right. Thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for having me as your guest. I appreciate it.
Thank you.